just to be clear, because James is going to share the time with me.
Sure.
And is the plaintiff reserve any time for rebuttal?
They reserved 10 minutes, which I granted them.
And so do they have an hour and 10 minutes? And do we have an hour and 10 minutes?
They reserved 10 minutes, so you can proceed.
So we have 1 hour.
You can take 1 hour, and if it happens to go over because you're finishing a topic or something, that's fine.
Thank you so much. Well, folks, we didn't even know each other 2 weeks ago, and here we are. Thank you. It's a beautiful thing, I think, that we resolve disputes in our country in this way, just like Lawrence mentioned. You're plucked and really against your will, even if you had to fight it. In theory, one of these bailiffs could go arrest you and come and make you come here. So we don't do that with anything else, but why do we do it? Because it's such an important thing to resolve disputes in our country in a peaceful manner. So, thank you. I'm Miss Paltrow's, and I'm going to just call her Gwyneth. I'm Gwyneth's lawyer. I'm her spokesman this week. So she sat there for 2 weeks and been a punching bag. We've blown through a lot of these cute little Post-it notes where she's sending me stuff. But I take it very seriously because she's comfortable in a lot of worlds I'm not comfortable in. But she is not comfortable in this world. It is not a nice thing for someone to throw a press conference and say, like King Kong, you knocked him out and walked away, skied away. That is not what happened. And the court has actually dismissed the idea, and that's one of your jury instructions, that this was a hit and run. That took no small amount of work, by the way. But that is what she was faced with. It takes a lot of courage, does it not, for her to sit there for 2 weeks and be pounded like a punching bag. What did she lose? Did she lose, oh, that's too bad, you had to come in early and have a massage? No. This is what she lost. She was in love with Brad Falchuk. Dated for 2 years. They both had, very interesting, I think, 9-year-old sons and 11-year-old daughters. It's kind of cool. And they said, how are we going to get these guys together in a loving, fun time? They're very busy, where we can kind of all be together for a couple days and see if this will work, if we can blend our families together. We're going to make it relaxed. We're going to put a lot of planning. She put a lot of planning into that trip. And so here they are. It's a little delicate because anyone who's been through like trying to blend families, it's a delicate thing. So what happened? They got there. They're organized. First day of skiing. They have ski instructors. By the way, I thought it was cool. I don't know if you did. Her dad taught her to ski at Alta. And she has tender feelings about that. She's been tearful with me in describing those ski trips with her dad, because her dad died in his 50s. In fact, it was so painful she didn't ski for a long time after that because she would miss her dad. But when her kids were of this age, and we're talking with Brad was a big skier. We didn't get to hear from him, unfortunately, lack of time. But they were going to come, okay, let's get our kids together. So what did they lose? They lost a half day of bonding, and even more, because now everyone's stressed. That was the day when they bond up going up the ski lift. They bond having hot chocolate mid-afternoon. They bond relaxed, laughing around the fire. A deep cost to my client. I told you when we first met, I wanted to concentrate on a couple things about Lady Justice here. By the way, if I didn't make it clear, you are Lady Justice. All right. Blindfold eyes. Because she's blind? No. She's smart. But she's not going to be distracted by chaos around her. Chaos like media, chaos like sympathy. Oh, don't we all feel bad for him? I would have liked, by the way, at least a discount on the camel ride on your request for damages, but that's another issue. The idea is, okay, we're going to focus, and we've tried, and the judge has given you all these warnings, don't be talking to people. Don't even talk to yourselves yet, because we want you focused. And that's Lady Justice. Now, I talked to you earlier about the scales of justice. This is a civil claim, meaning the preponderance of the evidence. The plaintiffs brought the lawsuit. That's why we're all here. His daughters say, isn't it terrible? These two daughters that he's brought here, his life is laid open. It's because of him. He hit her. He hurt her, and he wants $3 million for it. That's not fair. The easy thing for my client would have been to write a check and be done with it. But what does that tell her kids? It's cost of business. No, it's wrong. It's actually wrong that he hurt her and he wants money from her. And that's why we're here. All right. So back to the scales here on Lady Justice. He has the burden to tilt. Okay? Tie goes to her. Now she has a $1 counterclaim. My wife said don't waive the dollar, and I'm not waiving the dollar. But a dead even tie means neither get anything. And I'll walk you through that in just a minute. But let me suggest it's not even close. Let me suggest it's like this, the evidence here versus here, and let me talk to you about that. Let me mention a couple other jury instructions. So I talked to you about no sympathy, passion, or prejudice. We don't want you making decisions on that basis. I talked to you about the burden of proof. That is theirs. And then from today, let me talk to you about a few things. By the way, the burden of proof was evident because they get the last word. Because they have to tilt the things, you may have noticed this morning they could call a witness, and after I'm done, they can speak for a few more minutes. And that's what we do to the people who have a burden of proof. Instruction 30 that you were read today. Gwyneth Paltrow did not leave the scene of the accident without giving her contact information. Press conference 4 years ago. King Kong came out of the jungle, left me unconscious, and brushed off and went away. Utterly BS, and it's been discounted. It's not even before you. The judge took that away from you because it was so obviously false. 31 deals with spoliation. That's the GoPro issue. Spoliation is probably a word you've never heard before. It's a legal term. But the idea is if they destroy evidence, you can assume that it was bad for them. All right, so Terry, in fact, I should say Mr. Sanderson, in fact owned a GoPro. All right. He talked to his daughter that night, 6 p.m., so about 6 hours after the collision. She got off the phone with the understanding that he had a GoPro video of the incident and typed to him, I am so glad that there's a GoPro and that you're okay. All right. No one has the GoPro, but I'm telling you this. If you find that there was a GoPro and that he said, that will not help my case, delete. If that happened, you can conclude that it was against him, that it helped us. And wouldn't it have been nice if it had been around? Do you remember when we talked 8-9 days ago? I said, you're going to hear so much stuff about damages. So much stuff. But if you find that he hit her, you can ignore it. So we heard like a week of testimony about Mr. Sanderson's brain and how he thinks. He does like to be the center of attention. He likes to be in the spotlight. His own daughter said he would be dishonest for money or notoriety. Does that make you like uncomfortable? It makes me really uncomfortable. When Dr. Gibby was up there, he said, oh, he has a great relationship with his daughters. It's like, who? He says, two daughters. There are 3 daughters. You can't just pretend this stuff away. 3 daughters. It's pretty important, isn't it, for a witness to know that he's not in the least good relationship. And why? Because she said he was abusive. And a lot of other adjectives that I'm not actually will defer to you to remember. So Ms. Paltrow is asking for her dollar, but it's not about the dollar. It's not about, I mean, think of what her time is worth sitting here for 2 weeks. It's not about the money. It's about kind of ruining a very delicate time in a relationship where they're trying to get their kids together. That's what Terry Sanderson caused her. Pre-existing conditions. Oh my gosh. How do we not talk about what was going on right before and what versus what's happened after? He's 76. I mean, my parents, I'm not being flippant, they were dead by then. They certainly weren't taking 10 trips around the world. So we have to look at that. Those are the jury instructions. I do want to tell you the special verdict form that was appropriate. Can you bring that up? Lawrence walked you through it, and I don't think there's any harm in me telling you what I want. Is there? I'm going to ask you to fill this out. This is what you go to the delivery when you deliberate. These 3 pages. The last page really is nothing. So it's essentially 9 questions. And I want to show you how I want you to fill it out. I'm not trying to be subtle. All right, so was Gwyneth Paltrow at fault? No. If you answer no, go to question 3. So next page. Then you have to, that means Terry Sanderson's not going to take any money away from today. If you write no, so no on 1, you are done kind of in terms of his claim. Then you go to paragraph 3, which is our claim. Was Terry Sanderson at fault? Yes. We want you to say yes. Was his fault a cause of her harm? Again, we're asserting $1, but it was so much more. It made everyone nervous all afternoon. Was Terry Sanderson's fault a cause? Yes. And then, James, if you answer, regardless of your answer, go to 5. If your answers to question, so this is like a tax form where you have to like read it 4 times, sorry. If your answers to questions 1 and 3 are both no, 1 was is Gwyneth at fault, you should not proceed any further. And you go to the end and sign it. And this is because you're trying to figure out, was she at fault? Yes or no. Was he at fault? Yes or no. Did it cause any damage? You can actually find today that neither were at fault. Skiing is an interesting thing. We strap sticks on our legs at the top of a very high hill and go down for fun. It's breathtaking. I've done it. I love it. But it has inherent risks. So the back of every ski pass you've ever seen.
Judge, objection. You've excluded this inherent risk of skiing.
We referenced this, Your Honor. You said I could argue.
It applies to resorts and not to people.
No, the argument is improper, so overruled.
So, inherent risks, you've seen it on the back of every ski pass, and even your own common sense says, hey, if I don't go down this hill right, I could actually kill myself. So, Skiing is different. It's even different than driving. I mean, we don't drive cars down hills, right? Down icy hills. But we do ski down icy hills. The Deer Valley guy would say, we're never icy at Deer Valley. But nevertheless, it's kind of a dangerous thing. And so you can actually say no. Don't get me wrong. I want Gwyneth paid for the hardship Mr. Sanderson caused her. He hit her, he hurt her, and he's not entitled to sue her. I'm sorry, he's entitled to be here today, but he's not entitled to be rewarded for hurting her. That's not how this country works. All right, James, let's see. Then, if we go, if your answers to 1 and 3 are both no, you should not proceed further. So if you found not at fault, you're done. You go to the end, and your foreperson signs it. But if you keep going, otherwise continue to 6, James. I couldn't do this without James, if you can't tell. What % of the fault to you assigned to Gwyneth Paltrow? So then you have to figure out a percentage. It's possible that both people are at fault. And how this works is you take 100% pie and you find out, okay, Gwyneth's 10% at fault, Terry's 90% at fault. So a lot of things aren't just so obvious, like gray and white, black and white. We would, obviously, if you get this far, we'd want you to put 0 apportionment to her, Terry, 100%. I guess you could find that Gwyneth's entitled to 75 cents and not $1, believe it or not. Okay, then we keep going. James, whatever you can find here. What amount compensates Terry Sanders? And we just want you to go to 9 and give us our $1. There was a little issue raised about whether her attorney's fees could be added to that. The judge has said, I'm going to deal with that. That's not in front of you. All right, so your topic is this $1. Believability of witnesses. This was one of your earlier instructions. How do I figure out who's telling the truth here? And I'm going to put Craig Ramon. First of all, Terry doesn't remember much. There was one just blatant misstatement in their closing, which was Terry could talk to a wall for 2 hours and have a pretty good conversation. That was before the incident. That was misrepresented as being after the incident. Every time that issue came up, I said, before? Yes, before. All right. Let's go to talking about evaluating witnesses. I'm telling you, if we were in law school and we had a class about eyewitness, how an claimed eyewitness actually sees what he thinks he sees, Craig Ramon would be the definition of a bad witness. And I'm going to give you some objective statements about that. He's at the end of the court. He says, I'm skiing. And there at the end, I'm colorblind. I have imperfect vision. I don't know what they're wearing. I'm looking at other things. I'm not focused on them. He said he hears and turns. Well, guess what? Eric Christensen, the ski instructor, who they accused of a cover-up, which was dismissed, heard and turned. They're the same. They heard and turned. Craig describes himself as an eyewitness. Eric said, I didn't see the collision. I just heard and turned. They saw the same things. Interestingly, Eric came right over, and now's appropriate time to watch our little fun video. I don't know if you like these animations, but we kind of put them together so that you guys can kind of envision all this information coming at you. So Eric Christensen, did you like the guy? The guy is like, oh my gosh, I love this guy. He's been doing it for 40 years. He teaches art on the side. He's been a lifelong resident. He's married to someone whose whole life is skiing. And he is not a liar. He is not someone who covers up. He is not someone who falsifies reports. All of those allegations were thrown out. So we're not dealing with Deer Valley. Interestingly, it's not just Ramon versus Christensen, because all the Deer Valley people, do you remember the cool Whitney who took the toboggan woman? I mean, she's an amazing witness. She's up there, oh, I'm assessing things all left and right, you know, nothing, but that's a little different. So we're going to play this, and I think Moses is an orange. And there's Terry. So Eric Christensen says he sees Terry out of the corner of his eye. Well, he looks and sees, because he's in charge of sort of protecting these kids. So he says he's always looking up the mountain. And then he hears and turns. And then the next view, the next one. By the way, no one but Craig has the guy spread eagle with his head down the hill. There's no facial damage to his face. His skis stayed on. You've heard from these structural bioengineering people. If he came and got hit like Craig described, his skis would have popped right off. You don't keep your skis when you get blown. Sanderson says he was airborne, that he was flying. First of all, I'm not going to get into the weight, have him sit on scales, but twice, by the way, not once, twice Mr. Sanderson said I'm 3 inches shorter and 15 pounds lighter. We're not talking about today, we're talking about then. Then he was 3 inches. I don't know if he shrunk 3 inches since then, but he described himself as pudgy. He's coming downhill at a faster pace. I mean, anyway, the structural engineering people, which is kind of interesting, not structural, biomedical engineering people, I don't know if you got bored in that part or was interested, but I'm telling you, the science does not work for Craig's theory. Okay, so we're going to play this. Mr. Christensen, am I in your way, Judge?
No.
There's Moses, Carrie Oaks, Apple. It's a little hard to absorb, but here's Gwyneth, and there's Sanderson. Now, let me tell you what Sanderson said, and he said it just at the end of the day yesterday. I said, tell me what's going on right before the incident. He said there was a lady on his left that was kind of tentative. So I deliberately, I think I said, passing on the right. Pretty sure I did. So there's the woman he describes in green. And he's trying to he's watching her. He is blind in his right eye. He said, I use that term loosely. He's an optometrist, for heaven's sakes. He's blind in that eye from a stroke. He has helped him contribute to his retirement. Okay, so he's watching, and imagine this. I'm blind in my right eye, and I'm really mindful of not hitting this woman to the left of me. And then he said, nobody could have passed on my left except the gal I just passed. So that gal I was real conscious of because I still worried about her. And so as I went past her, I went inches per second past her. I just remember it took forever for me to get past her, and there were skis. And then that's when the collision happened. All right, so maybe run it one last time, James. So he's looking to his left with a blind right eye to make sure he doesn't hit the woman. He's looking to his left, and what happens? Gwyneth described, and praise to the judge for not letting this be reenacted with Gwyneth and being assaulted in front of us all. She is skiing, and two skis come in between her, and this is not a big hill. By the way, I mean, these are kind of photographs. This isn't just claymation here. And comes in, and she's like, what is happening? They're not going that fast. But Terry's going faster because his skis are coming in between her. It's because he's looking with his one, by the way, he has like half an eye because he has a cataract in the left eye, hearing's shot, and he says, I'm getting too old. I can't do everything I can. Well, I mean, I stopped playing church basketball after my knee injury. I'm like, I love it, but I can't do it anymore. Okay, so sometimes we have to give things up, especially when we're 76 years old. I'm sorry. I mean, that's life. But he comes in between her legs. She's going, what is going on here? It's not like a ski collision hit, you're out. And he's grunting, his body's against her. She's thinking, am I being assaulted? Because this isn't really a ski collision. And then they go for a little while. She said spooning. And whatever the next next animation would be, James. And then they go to their right. Now, I don't know, you've heard the ribs issue. By the way, if you're 76 with osteoporosis, you can break your ribs. You may see, and this record's in your documents, these weren't dramatic breaks. I mean, two were not even distended, dislocated. What's the right word? Displaced. Thank you. Two were not displaced, and two were just very minor displaced. Did they hurt? I'm sure they hurt them. I'm sure they did. All right, so she is on top. Eric Christensen said she was on top. And their skis are intertwined. And what is she doing? She's like, okay, I see I'm not being assaulted. And he may well have hit his head. He does have a helmet on. So does she, by the way. Craig Ramon is like, no helmet. He tried to change his testimony on the stand, but I had questioned him like 5 years earlier. No, she didn't have. I was really surprised. No helmet, no mask. Give me a break. For anonymity purposes as well as safety, this is a person skiing with her kids. She's pretty focused on safety. Let me just tell you that. All right. So what's the first thing does? Eric Christensen, is this the last one? Is this the last of the animations?
There were only 3 admitted, Judge.
Pardon me?
Only 3 were admitted.
I think there were 5.
3 full ones.
3.
Whatever you can take us to next.
Well, but you've already shown 3.
There were 3 videos that were
Eric.
That were entered in their total, and then there were 2 only partial. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
So whatever you can give
2
me.
partials that didn't show the actual impact.
Only Craig has their heads downhill. Moses, who you'd love him if he's a cute little 16-year-old now. But we didn't get it. We only got to hear him. He skis over because he doesn't hear anything, but his instructor comes over. He comes over and he sees his mom on the ground. Now downhill because she's gotten away from this guy. Okay, I'm safe. The idea of an assault just entered her mind. She said for a couple seconds because she's going, what's going on? This is the overhead view, and run it as you can. Here's Miss Paltrow. Apple, Moses. Here's Miss Paltrow. Here's the beginning skier woman. Here's Sanderson. And she's making these small turns on the right. He's making big turns. He's a lot faster. He's a lot more advanced skier, I should say. All right. Here's Christensen. You remember we placed him. Carrie Oakes went on ahead with Apple. Apple told me she heard a commotion, but she was hangry for French fries, and she just wanted to get down the hill. Moses is here. And so there we go. Okay, any other animations? Looking uphill. Paltrow in black. Sanderson. Beginning skier in green. Woman. Watch Sanderson. And then we're done. So it's probably that third one, that two back, that's probably the most powerful of them in terms of showing you the layout. All right, how am I doing on time, folks? I want to leave James 10 or 15 minutes.
30 minutes so far.
Thanks. So I'm going to 10 after. Thanks, Judge. After they've separated, Brad Falchuk comes up, she skis down, but there's then this period of time. So here's Eric Christensen. Eric Christensen said, I came over to find out what had happened. They say he came over to bully him. Deer Valley employees who bully their guests get fired. He's been there 40 years. You could see if his grandfatherly demeanor makes sense under Craig Ramon's story. It doesn't. It doesn't. Eric comes over and he says, first thing I'm doing, I'm taking off skis. Remember, under all stories, no skis came off. That tells you something about the manner of the collision, doesn't it? It wasn't like Ramon describes, flat out straight. By the way, Ramon, oh my gosh, he says he's out cold for 2 or more minutes. Do you know what did you do about it? Nothing. Nothing. Could you imagine looking at an unconscious person, splayed out, head down, skis on, for over 2 minutes? Could you imagine? I'm like, did you call 911? Did you check for breathing? No. Yeah. None of that. I mean, good grief. Give me a break. All right. Eric Christensen comes over and says, okay, let's take skis off. Remember, he had some personal knowledge because he knew kind of where Gwyneth was, and he kind of knew where Eric Christensen was. He knew where they were, downhill versus uphill, and he knew their skill level. He could tell, he said he could tell because Mr. Sanderson was an advanced skier because he didn't slide. I didn't really know this, but if you do kind of, you skiers will maybe know. If you can work your edges and you don't slide, apparently that means you're a more advanced skier. Okay, so he comes over, he's trying to figure out what's going on, but he actually knows some things. Gwyneth is pissed off. If you hit someone, do you yell at the person you just hit? No. The hittee, and I've been hit skiing, is usually the unhappy one. But she recognizes these things happen until he says, did you hit me? And she's mad because not only has he hurt her and hit her, but now he's saying, no, I think you caused this. And then she's like, are you kidding me? You just ran in my effing back. And Moses heard it. Moses heard it. All right. So then, Christensen, who I think is just a fabulous witness, I think everything he said is just utterly true. It's consistent with everything. He took off skis. I said, was Sanderson ever out cold? No. If he was, it would have been like that. Gwyneth, was he out cold for 2 minutes? No, he wasn't out cold at all. Don't you think people would be going like crazy if there was a man splayed out on Deer Valley, head down, out cold for minutes? That's not a believable story. Eric Christensen now is engaging people. Gwyneth's mad, but she's okay in the sense that she doesn't need help. She can still ski, but she said her knee, which she'd already had surgery on, hurt, and she has sustained a blow. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been hit, even if you're in a football game and you're all padded up. She had sustained a blow. She was upset. And then this idea of him not sort of, she says, you just did this. And then what did he say? I'm sorry. Does the person who got hit say they're sorry? No. The hitter says, I'm sorry. And he said it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, now she's okay. Okay, he's not denying the stupid thing he just did. But, okay, now we got to sit around and kind of we'll sort things out. Then Christensen goes to Sanderson. Tell me what you want to say. And he said, she appeared right in front of me. That's what he said in his report. She appeared right in front of me. That's consistent with Gwyneth being mad and saying, you just skied into my effing back. And it's consistent with Christensen seeing kind of what was going on. He was the uphill skier. He knew that. And there you go. That's, if everything's consistent, now if he'd said, I didn't do it, she hit me, okay, whoa, now we got to investigate. And then you recall, so okay, it's clear who did what. Christensen says to Ramon, your buddy just took out Gwyneth Paltrow. I think this was just after she skied away. And what did Ramon say? Did you correct him? No. That's the time to say, no, I saw it, and she hit him. That was the time. Ramon didn't say a word. He just sat there. He's not helping his unconscious friend, and he's not denying, under his story, what the ski Deer Valley representative has just determined. Your buddy took out her. All right. So that's the time to do it, not later. Remember, one of the things I said in opening is rely on the evidence before there's thoughts of lawsuits, because then you can kind of rely. People aren't thinking, okay, 10 minutes later, oh my gosh, Gwyneth Paltrow. Wow, that's something else. We were just in a collision with Gwyneth Paltrow. Now people are thinking, okay, wow, I'm famous. They're not thinking that yet. In real time, he's saying, I'm sorry, and then, are you okay? Everyone always asks this question, are you okay? And he said, I'm okay. Now, he tried to change it a little bit, and we had to go to his transcript, but he agreed. He said, I'm okay. And then ski patrollers come by. So, I mean, there would have to be a pretty vast conspiracy against Deer Valley for this to be a cover-up. And remember, they were already dismissed. Ski patrollers come by. They see some stuff going on. Everyone all right over there? Eric Christensen did not answer that question, because this is a contact now between injured skier and ski patrol. Eric's a ski instructor. And so what happened, Eric? He said they talked. So this isn't, we're not in there like trying to bully someone. Craig spoke to Terry privately. He said, Eric said, I couldn't hear it. And then, which obviously Terry at some point said he remembers Terry saying, are you okay? Are you okay? So there's a connection. And then what did they say? We're okay. And the ski patrollers left. All right, so that's what's happening in real time. Now we go to the paperwork. Why don't we fill out a big deal, get everyone's statements and everything? Because if this happens all the time on ski resorts, if everyone's okay, I mean, we don't have a scene about it. But they go down a little longer. They now know that Miss Paltrow was part of the collision. And then Terry, and you can believe him, but they now know, I'm not skiing too well. I don't feel that well. All right, fair enough. It did come 10 minutes after they found out who they had been involved with. All right, bring in Whitney. Whitney's an awesome, geez, I thought she was a fabulous witness. She pulls up, and she's all business, like, okay, I'm going to assess for unconsciousness. No. What happened? She says, what happened to Terry? He didn't say, I got hit. He says, I don't remember. I don't know. Did Craig immediately go in on that? They'll have to defer to her report. That was a legitimate question of mine. I'm trying to remember. James, when are you up?
5 minutes.
Are you up in 5? I can do that. That gives you 5 or 10?
Gives me 15.
Thanks. I'm going to be done in 5 minutes, folks. Okay. So Whitney's delightful, loads him up, takes him down, says, hey, before, I want you to remember 5 things. And this isn't like man, woman, dog. This is like, I got my degree in Michigan, I was Deer Valley Grand Slalom person, whatever. All these really detailed. I like horses, my horse's name, all this stuff. Remember it. Terry says, I remember. I knew I was now having a cognition memory test performed upon me. He goes down, and she then says, do you remember? And oh my gosh, he remembered. In fact, he remembered so well, he decided this is a good opportunity for me to text and post a picture of Whitney smiling and just talk about how wonderful she is. Whitney, meanwhile, is sitting there trying to figure out, okay, are any problems here? Are you seeing any signs of concussion? No, I'm not. Do you remember Dr. Edgley? I don't know if you thought that was cool, that a guy who heads up the U's acquired brain injury clinic has had an acquired brain injury. I thought it was kind of cool. Anyway, he goes, what do you look at? You look at period of unconsciousness. We have Craig versus all these people saying he wasn't unconscious. They even imply like Christensen didn't even care about us. He's yelling at us, he's bullying us, and then he's abandoning us on the conscious, drooling on the mountain. Give me a break. Is that what you know Deer Valley to be? So then, okay, he checks out at the main clinic. Then he's down to the Instacare. What is that Instacare PA looking? He's looking for, no, I don't see any signs of symptoms of unconsciousness or concussion. Because they're looking at memories, they're looking at periods of unconsciousness, and they're looking at, what was the third? Do you recall? Memory.
Ataxia.
That means inability to speech. I don't think that is what they were looking for. In any case, they're looking for any signs and the symptoms of concussion. No. Now that doesn't mean he didn't have a concussion, but it does mean this isn't anything severe at all. I mean, okay. Next day he goes to the VA. These are the people he knows. CT. Guess what? They're like, all the same abnormalities as you had on your brain before. The problem is, and by the way, he then goes for 3 neuro assessments, and they all say normal, normal to above normal, in some ways really above normal. So no assessments, those are all his treating providers. Why would we have our experts go do neuro assessments when 3 separate treating providers that he knows and trusts and that no one's paying say above normal? Why would we do that? But the problem is he then goes to Gibby and Fong and he just self-reports. Everything was normal beforehand. Wrong. And now everything's terrible. Wrong. He doesn't tell him he's flying all over the world, that he's biking, that he's the poster boy for fitness at age 75. He's posting every darn thing. I mean, this isn't like me sending out a private investigator and trying to find pictures. All I have to do is put Terry Sanderson. Oh my gosh, the guy's Mr. Activity. Heaven help me if I can be as active as he is at 75. All right, I have 1 more minute. I'm going to go back to Lady Liberty. So we talked about the blindfold, Lady Justice, excuse me. We talked about the blindfold and we talked about the scale. The sword. The sword, we want you to use the sword. This sounds harsh because we're not beheading anyone. The sword is to defend a meritless claim. This is a meritless claim. You don't throw a $3 million bombshell in the courtroom, call her King Kong, and walk away. You shouldn't reward that. And Gwyneth, who could have just paid it out, paid the ransom. No, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to have someone hurt me and then ask me for a lot of money. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to sit here. I said, you're going to have to sit here for 2 weeks in Park City. And you can't even look at your phone. And she said, I'm going to do it. I'm not paying that. We ask you for the $1, not because she had to go in and get an early massage, but it screwed up a very carefully planned, important time in her life. Thank heavens the family melded well together. But we want our $1. Thank you for your time.
Judge, can we approach briefly?
Sure. Mr. Egan, you may proceed.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. Are you guys hearing this? Okay. Okay, so it's my job to talk about Mr. Sanderson's claim that he's not living the life that he used to live, and it's Ms. Paltrow's fault. Hope I can be helpful to you. As we walk through some of this, I wanted to start by just pointing to this document. This, you remember, Whitney Smith was the ski patroller that arrived and wrote this report that day. A little bit later, Mr. Owens could not recall an important fact. This is the witness section at the bottom is not filled out. Mr. Ramon did not come forward and say, this is what happened, let me tell you about it. Whitney Smith would have written that in there if he did. She also pointed to, we also pointed to the fact that she did not write an X at that concussion and head boxes where she could have noted possible injury. She's, to use one of Mr. Sykes' phrases, she has no dog in this fight. she would have put X's there if she was concerned about that. She didn't. You also heard her talk about mild disorientation in her report, and that shows up here. And I think you've seen that the plaintiff. Gosh, I'm sorry. This thing can be finicky. You've seen it. I'll just move forward for the sake of time. There's those mild disorientation notes, right? And she explained that she didn't see that as an indication of concussion. She just saw it as being kind of rattled from a ski collision. And that's relevant to damages because Mr. Sanderson is claiming that he had a concussion, and all of the symptoms that have come from the collision relate back to that concussion. I think there's considerable doubt that he even had one. He may have, and you could certainly find that, but you might find that he didn't have a concussion. I think, though, that I want to kind of frame this with a certain theme. Maybe you've seen a pattern over the course of these last couple weeks, or the last 2 weeks. On the one hand, you have real events, and then on the other hand, you have embellishments. On the one hand, you have objective tests, and on the other hand, you have subjective reports. On the one hand, you have what happened in the past, and then on the other hand, you have perception of what happened in the past. The realities of life, sometimes difficult realities, and on the other hand, you have anxious exaggerations. I think Mr. Ramon took the reality of the collision and spun it into an attention-grabbing story for friends about dramatic injuries and celebrity. He was talking a lot about that. Ms. Smith overheard it as she was caring for Mr. Sanderson. And then there were those comments that we found in the middle of trial where he talked about it, and you heard him explain that he'd been talking about it with friends. He knew a lot about Ms. Paltrow. He's very interested in this. I think he took that reality of the collision and embellished what happened, what he saw. And Mr. Sanderson's taken the reality of his aging body, and he's turned it into a profound injustice perpetrated by Ms. Paltrow. It isn't that. The facts show that his health challenges started long before the collision, and they've progressed in a predictable way. I think you heard Dr. Hesh yesterday say if you look at his medical records, you look through the history, you take the collision out of that timeline, it reads coherently. The prior stuff would predict the next stuff. You don't need the collision to explain what happens afterwards. It's not to say that he didn't have injuries in the collision. Nobody disputes the broken ribs. And those were certainly painful. They did heal. And then the concussion, if he had one, was very brief, as you heard multiple experts say yesterday, and had very mild symptoms that may have even resolved within that day. So even if you find that Ms. Paltrow caused the accident, I think you only have sufficient evidence to find damages that relate to those broken ribs and the concussion that resolved very quickly. The slow degeneration of bodies is hard to accept, and mental health challenges are hard to face. It's obviously human to want a concrete explanation for these difficulties. But as the court has instructed you, Mr. Sanderson should not receive the money he asked for if you find that his perceptions do not match reality. The law requires that he convince you that more likely than not, he has suffered real harm, that Ms. Paltrow is and that Ms. Paltrow is the cause of that harm, and he has not done that. Through the course of the trial, you've seen that Mr. Sanderson does have genuine problems, and I don't want to minimize that. Experts from both sides have talked about his anxiety and depression and the trouble he's had with family and relationships before and after the accident. You've seen brain scans. Dr. Black came in here, and he was the only expert, I believe, that took you through all of them and explained how they, were back in 2009, look very similar to what you've seen going forward. They're connected to abnormalities related to aging and other conditions that might explain his problems. But Mr. Sanderson's argued that you should believe his experts because they evaluated him personally. The problem, I think, with that argument is that, as you've learned these past 2 weeks, these experts didn't carefully review his medical history, and they relied heavily on his unreliable reports about it. They also want you to believe what they've been calling the before and after witnesses, the family and the daughters, the friend, and then the girlfriend. And I think that you've learned these past 2 weeks that they didn't know Mr. Sanderson's health as well as they thought they did. And he was actually, they had, I think, acknowledged that he's good at hiding some of those issues, maybe totally understandably, and reluctant to share his troubles. So you have objective facts and then subjective reports. And the law requires you to find evidence, reality, not just the perception of problems. From our experts, you've heard a consistent, compelling account that Mr. Sanderson had these problems before that the concussion occurred, potentially, again, very briefly, if at all, and that those conditions that he's experienced afterward that he attributes to Ms. Paltrow are the predictable consequence of that prior history. They were, you heard them all yesterday. I guess you had Dr. Edgley the night before, but you heard them all, and it's a coherent, consistent story. I think you got a sense that they've read the records carefully, the objective records of treaters who have, again, no dog in this fight, just reporting what is going on for many years before and after the collision. Your Honor, I have till 25?
Yes.
Okay, 5 more minutes. I got a lot. I'm not going to get to all of it, but I'll try to get to the helpful stuff. Mr. Owens went through the various evidence about loss of consciousness and the different witnesses that have, I hope, persuaded you that Mr. Sanderson did not get knocked out for multiple minutes. But Dr. Eastfold gave you some interesting testimony yesterday. She said that the medical records after the accident are actually inconsistent with serious concussion injury. There was the cognitive assessments she pointed to that were normal. There was the balance assessment that was normal. You wouldn't expect it to be normal. And then there was the alcohol intake that actually increased, even though a concussion would reduce your tolerance for alcohol. Again, careful looking at the events in question, which I don't think you heard plaintiffs' experts do. Mr. Sanderson's perception is different, obviously. He not only thinks he was knocked out for minutes, but he said he had a profound cognitive trouble during this time with Ms. Smith, who said he was cognitively intact, could speak to him. He was writing articulate posts about her, could carry on conversation for hours. So you got careful evaluation on the one hand, and then you have extreme exaggeration on the other. And the law requires you to be careful in your evaluation. Mr. Sanderson sees the time immediately following the collision as a grim period that began a spiral, began spiraling his life out of control. I think he described the bright side before and then the dark side afterward. And I think it's important to recognize that, as we've probably told you too many times, a few weeks just prior to this collision, he was reporting some of the symptoms and the concerns he's saying connect to the collision, right? He's said he was getting old all of a sudden. He couldn't do things that he used to do. He'd get preoccupied with paperwork and other little things. And that's difficult, and I don't mean to make light of that kind of reality that aging brings upon all of us. But it's important that at that time there was no litigation. He's just reporting, and you heard from experts that point to that as a telltale sign of the kinds of things you would expect after the collision that he's attributing to Ms. Paltrow. Mr. Sanderson's told you that the collision forced him to be a recluse. And if we had time, I would pull up those pictures. We went through a lot of them, and I hope that wasn't overboard. You got a sense of just how much he has done since the collision. Traveled more than some people have traveled in their whole lives. And I think it's that this $3 million, I don't know where the board is, $3 million claim, I think doesn't acknowledge that reality. Mr. Sanderson is better than he realizes that he is. And it's not that he doesn't have problems, it's just that he is better than he realizes he is, and it's hard for him to accept some of the decline that he's experienced. And he's, again, grabbed onto this collision as an explanation for it. You've heard from Dr. Hesh and Dr. Edgley about how litigation contributes to problems like he's had, and you heard even from his own expert, Dr. Goldstein, that he's obsessed with this case and it's not good for him, that moving on would be helpful for him. And I think that we all want resolution to this case. Mr. Sanderson's asking to be compensated for a ski injury that the evidence shows that he himself caused. And the evidence also shows that his life is not the mess he perceives it to be. Ms. Paltrow wants him off the mountain too, but she should not be responsible for the cost of that. And so we leave you with that argument. Hope that you can, of course, hope you're persuaded, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Egan. Mr. Sorensen?
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Pete, I have this. Sorry.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
We appreciate the time and attention